I have been a fan of stand-up comedy since I was a kid, like probably 13, 14 years old. I've been infatuated with it as an art form. I love listening to stand-up comics. I listen to them all the time and I study what they do as an art. And Myq Kaplan is one of the best. This is why I was shocked when he called me and begged me to be on the program. Okay, that's not what happened. I was actually listening to one of Myq Kaplan's podcasts. He has a great podcast. He has two, actually. But I was listening to one of his podcasts, and Mike's been open for years that he's very much into mindfulness. And I thought, I would love to interview Myq on my podcast. He's funny. He's very smart. He's intelligent. He talks about mindfulness. I'd love to talk to him about creativity. Thought he would be a great podcast guest. So I contacted him. And now that I'm finished making a long series of cryptocurrency payments, I'm excited to introduce you to the mindful leader, Myq Kaplan. Myq Kaplan has appeared on The Tonight Show, Conan, Letterman, James Corden, Seth Meyers, Comedy Central, Last Comic Standing. That's where I think I first ran into him. America's Got Talent. He has a half-hour special on Comedy Central, a 1-hour stand-up special on Amazon called Small, Dork, and Handsome, which I just rewatched the other night. So good. And a brand new dry bar special called Live from the Universe. I watched that. That's incredible too. He has 2 podcasts. I enjoy those as well. The Faucet and Broccoli and Ice Cream, which is a great flavor of ice cream. His debut album, Vegan Mind Meld, was one of iTunes' top 10 comedy albums of the year. And his newest album, AKA, debuted at #1 and was called Invigoratingly Funny by no less than the New York Times. Myq, I am so happy to have you. You are one of my all-time favorite comedians. I think because not only are you hilarious, but you are so smart. And I just really appreciate you being here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. That I think that's enough. We did it. Thank you very much. Good night. Sincerely, thank you for inviting me to be on the show. I'm happy to chat.
So I do want everybody to know you're the first comedian I've interviewed on the show, and I want you and all the listeners to know this is not the morning drive show. So my expectation is not that we're going to be zany and hilarious. I'm not asking you to tell jokes. This is just a normal interview with a comedian. So I'm not asking you to like come on here and be hilarious and all that kind of stuff. So you are a funny guy. So if you say something funny, that's fine. I'm not asking you to not be funny, but this is not the morning drive show. So this is just me interviewing Myq Kaplan, who is also a comedian. But this is a podcast about mindfulness and leadership. And one of the reasons I wanted to interview you is I know just from listening to you that you happen to be in mindfulness, and that's something that is a part of your life. And we'll talk about that. But I want to start. I actually met you several years ago. You happened to be playing in Oklahoma City, or playing. I come from a music background, and I say playing. Do musicians or comedians say playing?
Yeah, I think that is acceptable.
Okay, all right. So you were performing in Oklahoma City, and my son and I were going to see you, and we happened to be eating dinner before the show, and we were sitting there, and we looked over, and I was like, I can't remember which one of us saw you first, but we were like, I think that's Myq Kaplan over there eating. We were eating at a restaurant that serves a lot of vegan food, and I know you're a vegan. We were looking at that's Myq Kaplan. So we went over when we finished, and you were still eating, and we went over there to say hi. Of course, that's always like, when you meet people who are famous, like you don't know how they're going to respond. And we went over, and you could not have been nicer. You were so kind. My son was pretty young at the time, and but you were just great. So thank you for being a nice, kind person.
I appreciate it as well. You know, they say that we see the world not as it is, but as we are. So for you to see me as a kind person must mean that secretly, at least, there is kindness within you and your son. And I only hope that I've inspired you to go up to every celebrity that you ever see from now on with similar expectations. I mean, thank you. I guess it's true what they say. The stars, they're just like us. They eat vegan food and are nice.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So I mentioned Last Comic Standing. I think that's the first time I encountered you, but you'd been in the business for quite a long time before Last Comic Standing. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe the season that I advanced extensively on Last Comic Standing was 2010, and I mark the beginning of my comedy career, at least as officially as I'm in charge. I'm the one who says it as 2002. Like I had performed at some comedy clubs. A little bit before that, but 2002 is when I really started taking comedy seriously and pursuing it. And so there's about 8 years of doing comedy before I did Last Comic Standing.
Yeah, and you had done. I'm assuming I had you already done like Letterman and the Tonight Show and Conan and some of
Uh,
those shows prior to Last Comic Standing.
yeah, I had my first television appearance was in 2008 on a Comedy Central show called Live at Gotham, and then I also did my half-hour comedy special taped in 2009 and aired just before Last Comic Standing started in 2010. And I did my first late night show, which was The Tonight Show with Conan, in December of 2009. So those were the few things that had been going on. That were everything was sort of starting to kick into gear around the same time. But yeah, Last Comic Standing was for many people, I think, the first place that was the first place that millions and millions of people got to have the opportunity to see me every night, and now all of them are having me on their podcasts.
Right, right. So I want to talk about Last Comic Standing for just a second.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had forgotten that that's where I saw you first until I was telling a friend that I was going to be interviewing you for this podcast, and because I knew he was a big fan of you also. I said, "Hey, I'm going to be interviewing Myq Kaplan," and he said, "Oh, from Last Comic Standing." I was like, "That's right. That is like where I saw him from." And so I went back and looked at just kind of read about Last Comic Standing. Dude, I had forgotten all of the people who kind of came out of Last Comic Standing. I'm going to read some of these names, and this is just a fraction of the people that
Sure.
came out of that show. Eliza Schlesinger, John Reap, Josh Blue, Amy Schumer, Ralphie May, Gary Goldman, Kathleen Madigan, Todd Glass, Lavelle Crawford, Doug Benson, Roy Wood Jr., Myq Kaplan. Man, these are some heavy hitter comedians. What a show. What was it like to be on that? What was that experience like?
Sure. I mean, I think that it was a wonderful, like, yeah, among other things, it was a wonderful opportunity. It was great that it gave so many great comedians a platform. You know, like without the show, like, Gary Goldman, Kathleen Madigan, Todd Glass, like they had careers,
Careers.
before, as did so many of the other comedians. But it might have been that Last Comic Standing was the first opportunity that many people had. If you weren't a comedy fan, if you weren't like a super comedy nerd and in on like, oh man, you gotta check these folks out. It was on NBC prime time, like 8
Yeah.
p.m. And for many years, I think I was maybe the eighth season. I don't know exactly how many there were, but it was presented as a reality show, so there were some times when they would ask us questions like, "Who do you think you're definitely better than if you went up in a head-to-head comedy combat situation?" And I feel like most of us on my season, at least, we all became like really good friends, and nobody felt in that actual like. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but it didn't seem like. It seemed like everybody answered those questions like, hey, we're all doing our best here. We're all doing our own individual thing, like I
Right.
mean, I was the five of us that were in, the top five that toured together, like included, like it was Felipe Esparza, Tommy Johnigan, Mike DiStefano, Roy Wood Jr., and me. And they're all just like super nice dudes. Like in the top 10 was rounded out with like Lori Kilmartin and Rachel Feinstein and Maranzio Vance, Jonathan Themius, and James Adomian. Like all super funny, super kind people. So it was like it was sort of like comedy camp, in the semifinals. I think there were like 40 of us, but it was like Joe List and Shane Moss and Nikki Glazer and like, people who have gone on to have like, larger careers than Last Comic Standing, even, which is, I mean, hopefully like the point, that the
Right.
show is like a nice launch pad that, before I did it, the fact that it is a competition was something I discussed with. I just started working with a manager, and we were discussing like, is this the right thing for me to do? Is this the right show to go on? And he's like, well, I don't know if I don't really like competition shows, but you could win, so maybe might as well. And
Right.
I do respect, like, there's a comedian I love, a friend named Ted Alexandro, who I remember talking to him either on my podcast or on his, or maybe just as a human being, not recorded somehow. I don't know if people are still doing that, but I remember like, he very specifically, didn't want to go out for Last Comic Standing, like, and just as a principle, he's like not, judging anyone else for doing it, but he's like, to me, comedy it's an art, it's a thing that he's like, I don't even want to be. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I want to not compete. I want to have it be,
Right. Right.
and I was like, that makes complete sense. And also, I feel like just in spirit, it wasn't like obviously in the letter of the law, it was a competition, but in spirit, it was really, I saw it as like just an opportunity for, people who didn't know any of us to get to see us. And
Right.
at the end of it, everyone can win. Like all the people that I named, even if they didn't get first place, if they weren't the last comic standing, like they've got, massive followings and careers, and they get to create the comedy and the art that they want to in the world, in stand-up and TV shows and movies. And so I feel like whenever anyone asks me like, should I try out for America's Got Talent or Last Comic Standing or anything like that, like, obviously you get to decide for yourself whether it's something that, you feel good about doing. But I always felt like the worst thing that would happen, generally speaking, like, is not even that they'd like, that you'd fail and that they would show that. And I mean, can you remember all the people that you named? They're fantastic comedians. Can you remember who can you remember that like didn't do well on the show? It just like it falls
Right.
away. Like I don't. I truly can't remember like, oh, like I'm sure there were sets, like that people had that didn't advance them and that they might have not felt great about, but truly, like on the on the longest timeline, I always felt like the worst thing that would happen on that show is you don't advance, and then your life is basically the same as it was yesterday
Exactly.
tomorrow. And so it could be a benefit. Like I forget where I first heard this idea, but the idea is that like in a career, over the course of a career, your successes add up and your failures don't. That, for
Oh,
every
that's good advice. Yeah, that's really good advice.
every comedian who is, successful by any metric has also, any one comedian you've seen have a great show has had tons of horrible shows. Any comedian that has a sitcom has probably had so many pilots that didn't make it. For and you don't have to put those on your resume. You know, like for a non-comedy job, you don't put down all of the like, you know, you put your special skills. You don't put but I'm also clumsy. You know,
Yeah.
you don't have to include the negatives. Like the
Yeah.
negatives
The
are, of
stuff
course,
you're bad at. Yeah. I'm
yeah.
bad at these things. Yeah.
Yeah, so please don't ask me to do that. But like, you can obviously you learn from, you know, tough experiences, challenges, like
Sure.
but you can, you know, obviously you can tell stories about those, and you can do whatever you want. But you know, when you're looking back at someone's career, or looking at anyone's career, like there's obviously so many ups and downs, but you really only like the successes add up and the failures don't. Is like, because let's say a failure is just like a zero. Like zero doesn't add anything, it doesn't subtract anything, but every opportunity that you feel good about, every achievement, every accomplishment, that adds something to the mix.
I love that. I think there's so much truth in that. The only time I think there's negatives is when you're like bad to people. Like when
Mm.
you like in the relationships, when you're a jerk to people, when you're unkind, when you're doing bad stuff, that's the only negativity that comes out of it. When it's just when you I think when you have a bad set, or when you like don't form well, that's I think you're right, that's a zero. The only time I think you really have negative is when you're like bad to people.
Yeah, I just I follow this Substack newsletter called Two Thoughts, and they share like I think every week now, a compilation of like two quotes a day from different thinkers and writers. And just this past week or so, there was a quote from a guy named Abraham Joshua Heschel, which said, "When I was young, I used to admire intelligent people. As I grow older, I admire kind people."
Yeah.
And I also feel like George Saunders is one of my favorite authors, and he has said, let me see if I can find it real quick. Ah, yes. So it's basically the quote I love from him. "What I regret most in my life are failures of kindness." Those moments where another human being was there in front of me suffering, and I responded sensibly, reservedly, mildly. And so I feel like that all goes together. Like, I'm not saying that that, you know, actions don't have consequences, but when in the realm of like creativity, especially, like it's important. If you're not having quote unquote failures, then very likely you're not, you know, taking the risks necessary to have the
Right.
great successes that you might want.
Right. Exactly right. You mentioned that art, or that comedy is art, and I one of the reasons I love stand-up comedy, and I study it, and I watch so many comedians, and I watch it as an art form. I love to laugh, but I love watching it as an art form, is because I'm fascinated by that process and the art of it. And it's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, is that process, the creative process. And I'm curious about maybe your creative process. Um, tell me a little bit about your process. How do you go about your
Sure.
work?
Sure. And I'll just say in advance that this is gonna be different for everyone, I'm sure. You
Sure.
know, like some comedians, I never know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. There's a writer, W. Somerset Maugham, I believe. Maugham, I think is the spelling. And the quote from him that I paraphrase, I looked up other ones, but this one just off the dome, it's approximately, he's like, I only sit down to write when inspiration strikes. Fortunately, it strikes every day at 9 a.m. on the dot, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I do one thing that I do, not explicitly to create comedy, but that I do that is like a creative way to start the day. Whenever I wake up, I usually, if I have time, if I don't have to like race to get a flight or something, I meditate for 10 minutes, 20 minutes maybe. I drink a liter of water. I read something peaceful. I'm reading a book right now by a Buddhist and Jewish woman named Sylvia Boorstein, and the book is called Pay Attention for Goodness Sake, I believe.
Yeah.
She's got some great ones. One is the first one I read is That's Funny, You Don't Look Buddhist. And
Great.
it just feels real. There's a thing I read once by a man named Alan Cohen. I forget the name of the book, but it was like a 365, like a page a day for like inspiration. And one of them, he talked about the formative minutes of the day, comparing them to the formative years of a life. That when you're a baby, literally, you're forming into a human being, and you need a certain amount of food and water and shelter and warmth and love and physical affection and care of certain ways. And the more you get those, then the better that like sets you off for mental and physical and emotional health in life. And similarly, Alan Cohen offers that the formative minutes of the day can do that. Like each of our days is like a human life, and we're like a little baby in the morning. And if you start with meditation or exercise or prayer or silence, or not immediately diving into the whirlwind of social media or the news, or just like not immediately. So it feels good for me to start with those things. And one of the things I start with is sort of a kind of morning pages writing. I go to a website, 750words.com, and I just write. Sometimes I write jokes, sometimes I write rhymes, sometimes I write an email to my girlfriend or my mom or another loved one. Sometimes it's just stream of consciousness. Often it's gratitude journaling. Because I often start the day, kind of my mind will be like, what do I have to do? And, thinking about the future and, verging on not clinical anxiety, but, that end of the spectrum of the normal range of human anxiety. That is not debilitating, but it's not fun. And, and gratitude, is something that really, is just a practical grounding force for me to remember, like all of the things that I have, even like the smallest things, just like my fingers that can type these words, the technology that allows me to do what I do, like that I have a career, that I have loved ones, that I have a building that I get to live in, that my legs work. Like last year I tore my not Achilles tendon. They thought it was that, but it was just a calf muscle. But for several months I was walking with a cane and like using this knee scooter. And so now I'm like, after that I do my best to remember, it's really, if you have the use of your limbs, like that's a blessing that not everyone has all the time. We're all temporarily able-bodied until we're less so. Or maybe we're not even all, like the ones of us that are, it's a temporary thing. And so I start the day like that. And so that's one ingredient in sort of the creative recipe of my life. But specifically with creating the comedy that I do, I used to just always carry a notebook. And if I thought of something or heard something or saw something, and I was like, that could be a joke or that could be an idea, I would just write it down. And then when I was driving, I wouldn't write it down. I was like, that's dangerous. So I would have just a digital recorder that I would use to record my sets. But then I would also record ideas if they came to me, and then transfer them to the notebook. And then that grew into a larger process. Like I heard someone talking once about how, like, when you're speaking, the brain is doing something different than when you're writing, and that comedy, generally speaking, is generally speaking. And as such, like, it seems like, why not, instead of going into the notebook to start with, why not start like all the time, have it be like not just when you're driving for me, but always. So now I just always carry this digital recorder, and the first way that I usually record an idea is by speaking it. I'll speak it into this recorder, and it has like, it can hold probably, I don't know, 1,000 hours of stuff, but it has these different units, like folders that can each hold 200 things. So once my recorder is full or I have time, I sit down and I do listen back and then write them all into a notebook. And then when the notebook is full, which sometimes I say that happens a few times a year, then I'll sit down and type it into the computer. And I have a little backlog now. I've got, I think, like maybe 4 notebooks that I haven't yet transferred. But then in the meantime, I'm going on stage and I'm doing shows and I'm trying jokes out and, new ideas. But every once in a while, like when I, go back to the notebook or go back to the recorder or go back and look through the archives, like, oh, that's, I've written so many more jokes and had so many more ideas than I ever could say all of on stage. And so like,
Right.
I'll find ones like, oh, that was whatever happened to that one. And well, here it is. And now I'll bring it back. And so, and I used to, when I started, I would say, I would write everything in advance and I would say things on stage exactly the way that I had written them. And if it worked, then great, I would do it again. And if it didn't, then I would try to tweak it or I would, stop doing it. I feel like Stephen Wright, a wonderful comedian, once said, he's like,
Brilliant.
he's like, I don't think if audiences don't laugh that it's not funny. I just think they didn't agree with me. And he's like, and if they don't agree with me, like if 3 different audiences don't agree about a thing, then I'll be like, well, I guess maybe that their audiences aren't going to agree on that one. But if they agree
Right.
3 times, then I'll be like, okay, now that one we all agree. That one is
Yeah.
a good one for me to keep doing, paraphrasing again. And so that's the way that I was. And I don't know what his process is like now or what's going on internally for Stephen Wright. But for me, definitely for the first like 4 or 5 years of doing comedy, it was like I would script it, I would say it, and then I would revise later until like somewhere time around 2006, I first met and worked with Rory Scovel, who I think is, a brilliant improviser and, in his stand-up, which he writes and also, creates on the spot. And seeing him, night after night in the Seattle comedy competition, like where everyone else was kind of doing their tight 5 to different audiences to try and compete. They're like, this is the best that I can do. So I'm going to do it the same every night. And that's what I was doing. And he was doing something different every night, different order, living in the world of a joke, longer sometimes, like finding new connections, being in the space, like just being present, in a way that I had not seen. And there's other wonderful comedians who are great in the moment with crowd work, with riffing, with experimenting, but he was like the first one that I like was like my peer that really loomed large. And then I also back in Boston where I was living at the time, my friend Micah Sherman, who he moved to town and he's now a very dear friend. And at the time, before I knew him, he wasn't my dear friend, or he was, but I just didn't know it. They say that everyone is some people say, some Buddhists say that we are all Buddhas, but just not awake to the fact that we are Buddhas yet. Though it's funny also because the word Buddha comes from, I believe the etymology is it means awake. So we're not awake. We're all awake, but we're not all awake to the fact that we're awake. We're living in like when you're in a dream and you're like, oh, then you wake up. Oh yeah. So I guess I thought I was awake, but so I think I'm friends with everyone, but just not everyone knows that they're friends with me yet. But so Micah Sherman moved to town. We became very good friends. And we actually started doing musical comedy together. We wrote a song called We're Different, where like the first line is Micah is tall and I don't suffer from depression. And pardon me a moment. But so there were so many ways that we were different and like complemented each other. Like he was this like, big active guy. And at the time I was just this, small, like, still presence on stage. So it was like a really fun duo act where like he would be, like, and I would be like, okay, let's just be. And I learned a lot from him. And I feel like, similar, I won't speak for him, but I feel like we both really learned from and grew to appreciate what the other one was bringing to the table. And what he was also an incredible improviser, incredible off the cuff in the moment. And so seeing people like Rory and Micah do what they did, I was like, oh, I wonder if there's a version of that I can do. And like just very specifically, there was a joke once that I had that I'd tried a few times and it didn't work. And a friend saw it in my notebook and was like, why don't you do that one anymore? And I was like, it never worked. And he's like, well, I think it's funny. And I tried it again and I just kind of kept talking after it didn't work. And I found like, I riffed a punchline and I was like, oh, I guess I'd come up with the setup, but I hadn't found, the thing that would make the audience laugh at the whole idea. Right. And that was very eye-opening to be like, oh, maybe just the thing that I write isn't always the thing. And I'm not like reinventing the wheel. There's many comedians who write on stage or go up with ideas and then riff them out, but I hadn't been doing that, but I started doing that, and then that became like a staple of generally the way that I create now is to I have these blurbs, these these little thoughtlets, these inklings, thinklings of ideas,
Yeah.
and I'll go on stage with them, but I'll be open to whatever's going to happen in the moment. I'll be like, well, compared to the version of myself that's writing it earlier, the version of me that's on stage performing it is older, perhaps wiser, more
Right.
experienced,
Right.
more open to what could happen, like the mystery of the moment. And so that's how I do it.
One of the things I enjoy about you talk about like evolving in that. One of the things I enjoy about that is like your Greg joke. I heard you do that, early on, like in Small Dork and Handsome. And then I heard you later on and you start doing the Greg joke. And I thought, oh, I've heard this before. But then like you change it up. And I'm like, oh, I have to stay on my toes with Myq because just because he's starting to go into the joke, I can't assume that I've heard him do this before because you change it up sometimes. And so I enjoy that about you. Like you think you've heard it, but that doesn't mean you've heard it.
I really appreciate it. I mean, it's sort of like I've heard this said about books and like musicals. I think my friend Gus, whose home I'm in right now, is a huge Stephen Sondheim fan, and I am whatever the level right before huge is. Like I love Stephen Sondheim, and I forget the exact quote. If Gus were in the room right now, I would ask him, but it's something like you're never done writing a musical. Just it eventually at some point it opens,
Right,
and
right.
and similarly, I feel like authors have said the same thing. Like if they had an infinite timeline, like you could keep tweaking the book but at some point they're like we're gonna put this out. And similar with my stand-up and I feel like I won't speak for everyone. I mean, okay, I'll speak for everyone on this one. No, I do think that like the longer you spend time with something, then the more you'll see. My girlfriend read this book called Visual Intelligence, and it really was like a lightning bolt book for her. Like she literally saw things differently afterwards because the book was the book is written by a woman, I believe, who teaches like sometimes law enforcement on like how to observe scenes better.
Yeah.
And the way that she does it, like that's one of the things that she does. And the way that she does it is through art, like through paintings, and that like
Mm,
she said most people. And so she read me some of the book, like some sort of snippets from it.
sure.
Uh, and one of the things that she said was is that most people, like in a museum, the average amount of time you look at a painting is like 15 seconds.
Right.
And you look at a painting, I see it.
Yeah.
And in the classes this woman does, and then in the examples in the book, she's like, sometimes I'll have students look at a painting for 5 minutes, for 30 minutes, for I don't know the upper bound of
Right.
time, and be like, keep looking at it. And if you keep looking at it for longer, you will see more. The more you look, the more you will see, which
Yeah.
makes like logical sense. But
Right.
and until you've literally seen, I mean, I don't know if there is a possibility of seeing everything, every brushstroke, and then in the world, like everything is constantly shifting as well. Like, there's going to be different shadows, like,
Yeah.
truly everything is like different molecules all of the time. Anyway, so the
Right.
more you look, the more you'll see. And so I feel like with that joke in specific, like I recorded it, certainly a decade ago, more than a decade ago.
Yeah.
And usually once I record something and it's on an album or part of a special, generally speaking, it's done, and I don't do it
Right.
again because I have like loads of other jokes and shows and
Sure.
ideas that are like, I'm like, wait, we got that one, and now this one. And I had occasion to revisit it in the run up to recording the Dry Bar special that I recorded it in late 2021 and just came out this year. And part of the the reason that I revisited like all of my old material to see what would be the best dry bar special I could do, uh, I didn't want to do like just brand new stuff that had never been recorded before. In part because I knew that number one, like I think that dry bar specials often get seen by like loads of people who weren't already my fans. You know,
Right.
people they have like, you know, their own sort of, you know, platform and fan base. And so I was like, oh, this might be the first time people are seeing me. Also, part of the whole deal of Dry Bar is that it is, you know, is a clean platform of a certain kind. You know, they have certain
Right.
parameters. And
Right.
so yeah, in the run up to it, my girlfriend and I listened. We were on a drive back from Chicago, I think, to New York, and we listened to all of the albums that I had recorded up to that point. And we like took notes. She helped me take notes as I
Yeah.
drove of like what jokes would be like the, you know, the greatest, cleanest hits. Like that I'm not
Yeah.
writing brand new things for it, but I'm like, what have I done of these, you know, 5 hours that, and we found like this hour would probably be appropriate and they only needed a half hour. And so I just started, you know, working on those jokes again. And then I found in the course of working on those jokes that like they would continue to grow and change and evolve. They weren't just the done, like the way that, you know, people, I studied linguistics in college and grad school. And in so doing, you know, I came across like this idea that, I mean, language is always evolving and shifting. Like we don't speak the same way that Shakespeare did, even though it is still, I think he was speaking modern English. Before that,
Right.
the Canterbury Tales. Before that, you know, Old English. And like, you know, we couldn't understand people who are speaking Old English, even though it's quote unquote English.
Yeah.
And people have, you know, when language shifts in the meantime as it's happening, like today when people are like, hey, I'm mad that literally means figuratively now. And we're like, well, that's, you know, it used to be that the word peas wasn't something that was plural of pea. It was like a mass, like of like maize. Like, you know, like
Yeah.
you wouldn't say like, oh, one May, two Mays. Like, and it used
Right.
to be that you wouldn't say one pea, two peas. And it used to be like apron was napron. And people said napron so, you know, quickly that it switched. They're like, oh, it's actually like, oh, is it an apron? They're like, I guess it is now. And the opposite happened for napkin. It was an apkin, and now it's a napkin. And like at the time, there were probably people that were like, hey, this language is devolving, you know, and it's not
Right.
devolving, it's just evolving. There's no like moral judgment with what
Right.
arbitrary sounds mean what thing as long as we understand each other. And so, but in this framework, people have like revered Latin. Like people are like Latin. And that's where we get rules like don't split infinitives, because in Latin, the infinitive was one word that truly couldn't be split. And that's why they said don't end a sentence with a preposition, because in Latin, that just, it didn't happen. It like wasn't a
Right.
possibility in the standard way of
Right.
using it. And so a lot of rules like that, you know, don't, that aren't required for English, certainly not the way that English is spoken, like in standard vernaculars. People are like, let's Latin. That's the, you know, the really the gold standard. And the reason that it was the gold standard, or is for the people that believe it to be, is that it's dead. It's that it's people aren't speaking it, so it stopped changing. They're like, look, we can really look. That's a secure look. That's so a language that's nobody is speaking, nobody's using, isn't like ultimately it's not practical. But they're like, that's why we revere it so much. And so I feel like that's what happened to my jokes. I'm like, they're not, you know, they're not dead, but they're like, you know, encased in resin of some kind. I'm like, look at these. They're done. I'm done doing them. And so it was at first kind of like, I mean, it's not like reanimating a corpse. So why would I even say that? But it was like, you know, putting on an old costume. It was like, oh, remember when I used to wear this? And like, oh, I never noticed this pocket here. And like, now that I am, you know, older and hopefully perhaps a better comedian and more observant, and just I had different experiences with the jokes, and it's really fun. So thank you. I don't know what the question was.
You did great. I want to read a few of your tweets because one of the things I love about you is your positivity, but also I love your tweets. Your tweets are fire. So if people don't follow you on Twitter, they should. It's Myq Kaplan, and Myq is MYQ. By the way, is that actually? I'm just curious. Is that your birth certificate, MYQ, or
It's not. I'll tell you in a
okay?
second. Though I also want to say I love, as a quote, I love your positivity, and I also love your tweets.
Well,
Um,
well, your
so
tweets are very positive. Your tweets are very positive and funny. But I just want to read a few of these.
sure.
So, in quotes, it says, "What was their opening line?" And then it says, "A comedian inquiring about a baby's first words." So that cracks me up, and it
Thank
reminds me
you.
of Steve Martin, who always says that comedians should never waste their opening line, like to come out like, "Hey, thank you all for having me here tonight," and you have some great first lines on your sets, so that's good. Um, this one is great. It's in quotes, and you kind of have to do the voice, which I'll be bad at. But it's like, "What's the deal? Reasonable doubt." Jury Seinfeld. So that
Thank
makes me
you.
laugh. And it's just in your voice, I assume. I like that eyeglasses. This is so my humor here. I like that eyeglasses are called eyeglasses to differentiate them from glasses that you drink from, which I call mouth glasses. That's
I very much appreciate it. I like that at the beginning of the show, you were like, now we're just going to have a regular interview. I'm not going to ask you to tell any jokes or be hilarious, but secretly, I will tell your own jokes to you.
yeah.
And I thank you very much. It's an honor and a
So,
delight.
so I just have two more. A tic-tac-toe board is an exoskeleton. That's
Thank you.
great.
Every once, I just will say, every once in a while, like I write something, like I feel like that's a joke that I might have told on stage. Like, if I came up with it 20 years ago, like my act was meant like jokes like this, that tweets, things that I would just tweet today that don't necessarily go with a larger, piece or narrative or through
Right. It's
line.
like fast one-liner kind of things
Yeah.
almost.
And so every once in a while I like revisiting those, like it, because that one, like I don't know, maybe I could add to it, maybe I could tell it on stage and do
Right.
something with it, but it's kind of just like its own little, it is a complete piece, and it's just a small thing. And so I really do appreciate, I like that people get to see them, I like that people enjoy them, and I like revisiting them. Sometimes I do like set like reminders in my Gmail of like, on this day I tweeted this thing, and I'll just
Right.
like revisit it. Sometimes I'll retweet it, just
Yeah.
be like, look at this. Sometimes I'll share it again. Sometimes if I can think of a way to do it on stage, then I'll bring it to that. But otherwise it's just like, oh, there it is. It happened. It's
Right.
done. And now what? Now another thing.
Right. This is the last one. We've had a lot of Elon Musk in the news. So you tweeted, "I would like for Elon Musk to marry Bill Gates so that his name could become Elon Gates."
Oh
That's
yeah.
fantastic.
I very much appreciate it.
So uh, the time's just going by so fast. I want to talk to you about, first of all, I just want to mention, I love your positivity. You're so positive. Were you always positive? Did that come with your mindfulness journey? What? And then I want to
Sure.
ask you about your mindfulness uh, journey itself. But talk
Sure.
about your positivity.
I think that it is. I mean, I think that it's been a part of me like for most of my life. Like I think I owe a lot to the luck of having been born in the circumstances that I was. With parents. My parents were teachers. Like we weren't super wealthy, but we had a home. There was enough food. I was an only child. I was very cared for. And so I'm very grateful to my parents and my family for, like I grew up in a kind of, I was sheltered in many of the ways, like literally in a house. And then also just like, I was kept sort of safe and uh, and that's, sort of a double-edged sword that eventually I learned that, oh, like, we're kind of all in this together, and not everyone had the advantages that I did, not only being, like a straight white cisgender able-bodied male in America, but like, I
Right.
mean, certainly those things, as well
Yeah.
as, the class, the opportunities that have been afforded me, the education, all of those things. So I feel like one sort of formative experience in my life was that my parents, we moved when I was like maybe 12, 13, right after seventh grade for me, and I had to start over at a new school. And that was, puberty's beginning. Also, my parents were getting divorced right around that time as well. And so that was, in my life, a little upheaval and turmoil, and having to start over, meeting, new kids, which I'd never really done. I had like I had kind of like a lonely time for several years. And the summer camp that I went to was very affirming. And I like learned that there were kids out there who were kind and compassionate and welcoming. And like I felt like my summer camp was sort of where all the weirdos from their own schools, like all the misfits, fit together. All
Yeah.
the outcasts, like we're like, oh, hey, now we're incast here,
Yeah.
and so that was something that then sort of seeped into the rest of my life. Like by the end of high school, I had a little group of friends. I had, started dating a woman, or a girl at the time, as I was a boy. And then I went to college, and then college was sort of like another like wide open field where I got to start over, but I felt like more equipped to do so. So I feel like that, sort of like it absolutely, was not comparable to the suffering that so many people experience in life in so many ways, but like my own personal suffering journey that many experience of, like, the loneliness, the angst that so many people at that time of life also are experiencing to some degree. But I came out of it so grateful that, I mean, that high school and the things that were challenging about high school were over, that I had these new social skills, the new blossoming like community that of friends that I became a part of at my summer camp, some of whom are still my dear friends to this day. I actually just yesterday went and did a stand-up workshop at the summer camp for kids, and saw some old friends who are still working there. And so I feel like it's all a gradual experience for me of like, I can't point to the time of like, and this is where I became positive, but
Right.
I eventually at some point, probably in my some late 20s or 30s, like heard Thich Nhat Hanh on a podcast, like the TED, like a TED Talk hour or something. And he was talking about, it was like a whole hour about gratitude. And I think it was he who was like the first person, or somewhere in that talk, that I learned that they like research shows that like legitimately the most grateful people are the happiest people. And they're
Yeah.
not grateful because they're happy because they're grateful.
Right.
And so that was something that really like I remembered and impacted me. And I still, like, I'm not aware of it all the time. I do my best to think about it, especially when things are challenging. That I also love, Thich Nhat Hanh's, I think it's him who said, like, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way.
Right.
And like the Dalai Lama saying, like, be kind whenever possible. It is always possible.
Yes.
And so, I mean, specifically the engagement with Buddhism that I, have really been enjoying learning about, uh, that I'd say it all, like, over the past 7 to 10 years, like, here are some changes that occurred in my experience. One, I met my girlfriend 7 years ago, and she introduced me to like authors like Pema Chodron I had never read before, who I really love. Byron Katie, who is a wonderful spiritual teacher as well, and Brene Brown I hadn't really experienced before, and she's wonderful. And then that, like, also adjacently, like people like Ram Dass, and I learned about like Buddhist teachers like Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein, and I also around that time started meditating. At first with the Headspace app. Now I use Sam Harris's app, Waking Up, which has lots of great talks by Alan Watts and conversations with Joseph Goldstein and discussions of Buddhism. Also, maybe like 3-4 years ago, my friend Gus, whose home I'm in right now, he is a practicing Buddhist, and so we have been like, we've had discussions. Like, I haven't become a Buddhist, but I've like learned a lot more from him. He lent me my first Sylvia Boorstein book, and just so I've been learning a lot about Buddhism. I started meditating. I had been doing psychedelics from my mid-20s, like mushrooms mostly, occasionally. I discovered about 10 years ago, probably maybe 9 years ago, I did my first ayahuasca ceremony, and that was something that also, had a great impact on my life. And I've done, numerous times since then that, kind of just like reading George Saunders, and like, the through line of all these things is that, like the main, like when I go into ayahuasca ceremonies, the guide will often say, like, remember to, whatever you experience, aim to approach it with compassion, forgiveness, and self-love. And, love for self, love for others. That's the whole, the thing about Buddhism that I love, or one of many things, is that the goal is like, the elimination of suffering and the increase of happiness and the roots of it for all sentient beings, and that's what we all want, and I will speak for everyone now, finally, like every sentient being wants there to be less suffering for themselves, at least, and more
Right.
joy, like whatever that means. Obviously it can manifest in many ways. If you're a masochist, like and it makes me feel pleasure to experience pain, like then that's a little wrinkle there. But in general, like we all want more happiness and less suffering, and
Right.
the goal of Buddhism is to help get us there.
Right.
And so I think that in part also, like the 2016 election was, as it was for many oblivious white people, perhaps, or not just white people, but I'll speak for myself again here. Like that. Oh wow! Like not everything on one level, everything's not okay. That there are, I mean, and on one level, as long as we are in what the Buddhists call samsara, the cyclic suffering of existence, even when we're happy, we're worried that the happiness is going to fade or disappear, because everything is temporary in a way that if we don't have a thing we don't want, then we're like, I want that thing. And if we have a thing that we want, we're like, I hope it doesn't go away, and it will. And so, but and then there's obviously, you can zoom in and out at the scope, but my goal has become like to think about the luck, the fortune that I have had, all the things that I've been able to accomplish because of like where I started in life, and the opportunities that have been afforded me, like just with respect to obviously my career, but also like my mental health and my well-being, my physical health, like the connections that I have, like my wonderful girlfriend, my wonderful family, my wonderful friends, like all of these things, like I have, like my cup is very full, and it's a thing that needs to be constantly, sometimes I wake up and I'm like, gotta fill the cup again, meditate,
Right.
journal, do the things, and put my I have like, it's often easy for me when I'm aware of it, when I can remember to put my oxygen mask on and then help
Yeah.
spread masks out among
Right.
others. And so because I feel so fortunate, I feel like that is what that's one of the things that enables me to like help other people not be, hopefully not toxically positive, to not like a friend of my mom just sadly her son died yesterday, and it was not a surprise because he had been sick, and it was sadly expected at some point. I mean, it's expected for all of us at some point,
Right.
but
Right.
and I know in certain circumstances, like I don't go to a grieving person like, well, is there a bright side, is there a silver lining?
Right. Right. Right.
And of course, like the what I do in a situation like that is like, hopefully try to offer what I can, try to be there to listen if they need, try to like be there to offer, whatever, food, help, an ear, whatever it can be. Uh, and so I feel like that's just I think it's important to say, like, my goal is not to just to be like blindly positive,
Yeah.
but and I want to do that for my own like there's a thing my girlfriend shared with me once that I don't know the original source, but it's like in in matters of spirituality, let's say, in matters of things like this, like it's good for us to think about our own souls and other people's stomachs. So,
Mm, that's good.
like
Yeah.
if we think we know how people should be, like we don't know anything about what anyone else is experiencing, really. We only, if anything, know our own internal experience. And so work on, if I'm like, people should do this, well, then I should do that. I'll do that, And, like there's so many times when, you get cut off in traffic and you're like, what's going, like, I mean, well, who knows what's going on with that person?
Right.
And
Right.
like another thing I love that I heard on I think the Dear Prudence podcast and other places since, a guest shared, like, don't compare your insides. Don't compare your insides with other people's outsides,
Right.
because, we often are like, if something if something doesn't go great in our own life, we're like, well, that's external circumstances. But sometimes if something doesn't go right for somebody else, we're like, well, maybe did they do everything that they could, Uh,
Right.
and so, yeah, I think that I feel like the answer to your question of my uh, I feel like, mindfulness is something that I feel like it started encountering around when I was like, I think mindfulness meditation was like one of the modalities of meditation that I first, engaged with. And it's discussed in a lot of, Thich Nhat Hanh books and other Buddhist teachers' books. And, uh, and so I think that, it's, I'm no expert. I'm certainly, I get, hooked and distracted. And even when I'm meditating so frequently, I'm glad to have a guide be like, and if your mind has wandered, I'm like, it absolutely has,
Right.
100%. And I mean, I do feel that I'm very fortunate that, when I do comedy, like, I feel like that is an experience where, a lot of the time, and certainly in the best cases, I get to be present. I get to be in the moment. I get to be sharing things that I care about. Like, whether, like, sometimes I'm doing like a show that goes a certain way, and sometimes like that I've scripted, and sometimes I'm almost always welcome to being invited to deviate from the plan,
Right.
because like that's the plan, is to, be open to whatever might not be a part of the plan. But yeah, so I think that to put a button on maybe both of those things as much as possible. Yeah, I feel like I've been positive. I've had positive experiences. I've had so much, filling the cup of my life so often, and then like learning about everyone else's experience, learning, like individually from other comedians and other artists and other, writers and people sharing their stories, that I'm like, oh yeah, like mine is not the only way. Mine is not the one true way. Mine is, mine is my way. And mine is a pretty fortunate way. So the more I learn, the more I'm like, oh yeah, very good to keep, like, understanding that there are things that I don't understand, and just offering kindness where I'd say that's the framing that I would say, if, if somebody was like, how do you be so positive? I mean, my goal is to, be kind to people, which I think involves like meeting them where they are, listening to them,
Right.
being open, receiving what is present, which is, I think, I just in the book that I'm reading by Sylvia Boorstein right now, Pay Attention for Goodness Sake, there's a moment in it where she's describing a story. I think her grandchild asks her about, like, how do you know that you're not paying attention? If there are times that you're not paying attention, like, how do you know if you're not paying attention?
Right.
And she like goes through a story and comes to she's like, I don't know what I told him, but she's like, later I was on a flight and was like looking around and there was like various judgments of different things, like people on their devices, people on watching a movie and listening to a thing and reading a thing. And then she came to a realization. She's like, oh, probably, she's like, I don't like flying. Maybe these other people don't like flying. Maybe people are just doing what they can to, get through the experience of flying. And then she was able to like rest in, sort of peace and compassion for the shared experience that everyone might have been having. And she was like, so that's when I realized the answer to my grandchild. It was when I know that if I'm not paying attention, I can tell because I'm not being as kind as I could be. She's like, if I'm paying attention, then I'm being kind.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, because and like with the paintings, with the visual intelligence book, like the more you look, the more you will see that, of course, or you won't know exactly what other people are going through, but you will remember that other people, they're having their whole inner life experience also that we can only imagine. And so the only like sort of rational response to it is like, for anyone who's going through anything, they used to be a baby, and they didn't choose the things that happened to them to make them be whatever potentially irritating way or, aggressive way or whatever it is. And it isn't to say, like, I don't want to verge into the toxically positive, like, so if somebody's causing harm, then, I think it's both true that we can, from a distance, help the people who are being harmed, help people get out of harm's way. And
Right.
also the people, like, there's a thing that Shanti Deva, the Buddhist sage, said about like if somebody's getting hit with a stick, you generally don't get mad at the stick. Like the stick is just, an instrument being caused,
Right.
it's causing the pain, but it's not intending to cause the pain.
Right.
And he also says something like, in a much more elegant way, that the person hitting you with the stick is also like the stick in a way, that, to be angry at that person. I mean, it makes sense to be angry at that person in a
Sure.
conventional way compared to the stick, but zooming out long enough, like that person is also being caused, like it's all a matter of causes and conditions that are leading the
Right.
person. And so I think somebody says, well, then who are we to be mad at? If you're not supposed to be, don't be mad at the stick, don't be mad at the person. And the answer is,
Right.
be mad at the delusion. Be mad at the delusion that you are under, that they are under. And in fact, probably, again, from a distance, like get away from the person hitting you with the stick. But
Right.
the person hitting a person with a stick is under a greater delusion
Mm.
than a person not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So good.
yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, I've got you over time, but I have two quick questions left.
Sure.
So one's a question. Then the last thing is you've got some stuff coming up that I want us to talk about.
Sure.
The last question is we have the thing called the Music Minute. And in the Music Minute, we just want to get to know you a little better by the music that you enjoy. And I know you're a musician yourself. So kind of talk about that for a second, and then just some of the music that you enjoy listening to.
Sure. I started playing the violin when I was 4 because my parents were music teachers and music was kind of like the religion of our household. Like I did go to like a Saturday program of music for most of my childhood, like all day, taking lessons and playing in orchestras and other groups and music theory and learning. And I didn't like it for a long time because I was like, I was made to do it. It was mandatory.
Right.
And then in high school, I started teaching myself guitar, which was really fun. My friend Ari from summer camp, who was one of my best friends in my teenage years, and still I'm gonna see him, visit him on this very weekend. He had a guitar, and I picked it up, and it was like easy to play around with because I'd played the violin for many years, and then I started loving the guitar, and I actually like started writing songs, and that was my first dream goal, like like my career aspiration was to be a singer-songwriter, and I wrote some funny songs, and that's what actually led me to
Right.
perform at a comedy club because I had some funny songs that I wanted to share. Uh, and so yeah, I've loved since high school. I've loved making music, and I mean, music. It's just, oh man, I have you heard it? It's so great. It's like, I,
I'm
I know there's
familiar.
some people, yeah. There's some people who are like, really, like my girlfriend is also a musician and loves music, and additionally, she loves dancing. Like she is like a kinesthetic art person as well, and visual. Like she's got it all, and I mean we've all got it all, but like she's great at it all. I've been like a sound person, an audio person for like, I mean, comedy is physical as well. I like my body is involved, but like I come at it mainly from like the audio aspect of it. The I just I there's a musicality to everyone's comedy as well, I believe. Unless they're doing it completely silently, maybe there's, I don't know, the musicality of a mime. But yeah, I love creating music. I love recording music. I love listening to music. And so the music that I love listening to lately, one of my newest favorites is a group called Roomful of Teeth. And they are I don't know if it's the same people all the time, but it's around like 8 people. Sometimes it's just voices, sometimes there are instruments. I came across them. My girlfriend and I were listening to Dolly Parton's America, the Dolly Parton podcast, which is really great. And there's an episode where there was just like, it was a concert of like musicians that had been maybe involved in making the podcast. And there was a woman named Caroline Shaw, who I believe won a Pulitzer for music about 10 years ago or so. And we were like, what's Pulitzer Prize winning music like? Like the music she played on the show sounded cool. And we listened to this piece that was like a 4-part, like these 4 movements of a partita, I think it was called. And it's just like 25 minutes. And we listened to it. And it was like, unlike, I mean, anything that I had heard. And they just do these beautiful things with their voices that are just so precise and perfect and surprising. And they've done music in like some TV shows, but they just have so much. So I love Roomful of Teeth. I'd say that in high school, my first musical loves were They Might Be Giants and Ani DeFranco.
Right.
And still to this day, I think they are fantastic creators. Yeah. I love a lot of hip hop. One of my best friends in the world is a guy named Zach Sherwin, who has been a comedian, a rapper, and now his magnum opus that he's working on is called The Crossword Show, which I recommend anyone see anytime that you can. It's not everywhere all the time, but The Crossword Show is beautiful. And Zach Sherwin is on, he's got a YouTube channel with many of his songs, music videos, stream them, Spotify, etc. Like, I think that he is like, also like, he's brilliant and funny. And, some of the songs, there's like a trilogy on his album called Brutus about a duck named Brutus that he saved. And it's just all the songs, these 3 songs are about him saving this duck, and like makes me tear up whenever I listen to it. Some other friends who are rappers I love, Paul Barman, George Watsky. And I mean, there's so many. Like I love rhymes. I love the stories that people tell. Let's see, Reggie Watts. I love Tim Minchin. I love Bo Burnham. I love Regina Spektor. I think On the Radio is one of my favorite songs in the world. For Tim Minchin, I love the song Not Perfect, and also so many of his. But yeah, I mean, if I keep thinking about, like, the more you look, the more you'll see.
Right.
And yeah, those are sometimes my girlfriend and I on a road trip will just put on like an 80s or 90s, playlist, and the songs of our youth are also beloved. Right. We love some Queen, we love some Soundgarden. She loves Joni Mitchell, and as well I do. Yeah, my mom in the house growing up. There was a lot of Billy Joel and John Denver, and so they have a special place in my heart as well. But yeah, I just love music.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, you've got your podcast. You've got two podcasts, The Faucet, which looks like it comes out maybe monthly or so, something like that.
Yeah, The Faucet comes out irregularly. So Broccoli and Ice Cream comes out regularly, approximately weekly, at least 4 times a month. And that is in part because I have a Patreon, which I feel an obligation because I have promised people that there will be a certain number of episodes. So on Broccoli and Ice Cream, I talk to, friends and fellow artists and comedians about the work of their life and the joys of their life. And yes, that comes out on a weekly-ish basis. And yeah, The Faucet comes out. I used to do it. I mean, it started during the pandemic. Rini, my girlfriend, was like, I saw the Zoom shows that I was doing, and I would be like riffing a lot and in the moment so much. She was like, you can just do that every week if you wanted. So originally it was, I would do at least one a week, sometimes live because there was like not a lot of other stuff going on. And then if I went on tour, I'd be like, oh, I'll do one every day. I'll be like, here's a little tour journal. And the fact that it's usually just me, or sometimes I'll have a friend on as well. But the fact that I'm the only one in charge of it means that it comes out whenever I feel like it. And sometimes life in the past several months has been busier than it often has. My girlfriend and I had to move out of our home, and we are not yet moved into another home. We are traveling for the length of the summer and like going to the Edinburgh Fringe Fest for all of August. And I know people listening to this, it might be August already. So quick, get to the Fringe. It's still happening. There's a couple more days. But so because it's been, I love, I have a lot of things that I do on a schedule that I think it's nice to have rituals and habits, like when they're things that are constructive and helpful. There was a thing that some Buddhist teacher said once, or I don't know if I listened to it on a podcast, but like somebody was asking their teacher, like, should we, like, if the ultimate goal is not clinging, non-attachment, like, then what about our meditation practices? Like, should we not cling to those? And the teacher was like, in the beginning, feel free. If you're going to cling to anything, cling to those. And like, eventually, maybe when you come to a point where you're like, oh, it's not, when it's not necessary anymore, then you can let them go. Like, and I feel that at least I can understand that with comedy. Like in the beginning of a comedy career, before you even have a career, cling to like write every day, perform every night, get out, go to open mics, listen, perform, write, edit, keep doing that until you get to a point where you're like, oh, I can take a night off, and so that is what happened with the podcast as well. Like it existed at a time when I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to do it every week. I'm going to do it every day. I'm going to do it every however often I can and want. And then eventually I'm like, well, I'm not going to, beat myself up for not doing it on a certain day or on a certain time frame. I'm not going to like cause greater turmoil and upheaval. I'm like, as long as I'm doing something that I think is important, meaningful, desired, worthwhile, like I might go days without playing my guitar, and I'm like, well, I was doing other things. I might go days or months even or weeks without releasing a specific Faucet podcast, and I'm like, that's okay too. Like I'm aiming to have that sometimes it's the hardest to have the compassion and understanding for ourselves. Like, but if a friend came to me and was like, I've been going through a lot, so I haven't released a podcast recently, I wouldn't be like, well, why not? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I really love your Broccoli and Ice Cream podcast, which is done pretty regularly. Talk about the Dry Bar special. Tell them how to access the Dry Bar special because it's really good.
Sure. Thank you so much. So right now, drybarcomedy.com is, I believe, the website that if you go to it, they have a subscription service. And if you get a monthly subscription and use the promo code Myq Kaplan, spelled my weird way, MyQ Kaplan, use promo code Myq Kaplan, and you will get a free month of Drybar. And then if you forget to cancel it, then that will give me some money all the time that you are unwittingly subscribed. But you can also, of course, sign up get the free month, watch it, and then, I mean, there's a lot of other great comedians on there, so enjoy. But that's the way to take in that whole special right now. There is a snippet, there's like a preview, but then there's also on YouTube, on the Drybar channel, one like a fairly sizable chunk. Like there's a 10-minute chunk of it, which is like the last 10 minutes of it. So if you want to watch the last 10 minutes of it, you can. Though I do recommend, you can for free watch the whole thing by putting in promo code Myq Kaplan.
You can also watch Small, Dork, and Handsome, which is one of your earlier specials on streaming services. And you can catch your albums on Apple and Spotify and all that stuff, which are, I mean, if you people want to laugh, you have to listen to this stuff because it is so good. So good. And you've also got a book coming out.
Yeah, the book is out now. They have physically arrived at my mother's home. Where I will be later today and bring them on tour with me. So I will have them available on tour, and they're also available if you are not where I am via my website. And it is a book I co-created with my friend Ramin Nazer, who is a fantastic artist of many kinds, including visually. So he has illustrated many of my jokes and ideas. And so there's like, I don't know, 75 or 80, pages in this book that are just like, I said a thing, I wrote a thing, and then he created a wonderful image. And some of those images are on my website, the book page, and his website, the book page. So go to MyQKaplan.com. Or RaminNazer.com, and you can order that book to be sent to you wherever you are.
Excellent. Well, Myq, I really appreciate your time, and it's been great talking to you. I feel like I could talk to you for hours on all kinds of topics. We didn't even get into philosophy and all that kind of stuff. I know you're a philosophy major, but we could just have a great day. We didn't talk about Nickelback, all kinds of fun stuff.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. For anyone who's curious as to my thoughts on Nickelback, check out the album AKA, my most recently recorded album, which is streaming all the places. But I think we also did talk philosophy a little bit. Regardless, it was a very rich, full, meaningful conversation. Thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I know you loved Myq Kaplan. He is fantastic. I really want to encourage you to go listen to his stand-up. I promise he is brilliant and he is funny. You will laugh. I give you the David McLaughlin guarantee that you will laugh with his stand-up. You can check out his albums on the streaming sites. You can check out his stand-up on the television streaming sites. Just be sure to go check out Myq Kaplan. MYQ is how you spell Myq if you're looking for him. Also check out his website, MyQKaplan.com. You can get his book. He's a very talented and creative guy. Brilliant. Check out, he's on Twitter, he's on X, all of those things, Instagram. Just be sure and check him out. You will thoroughly enjoy his humor and creativity. We'll do a meditation here in just a moment. Before we do, I want to invite you, if you would, to rate and review the Mindful Leader podcast. If you enjoyed this episode with Myq Kaplan or any of the other episodes, go out and review them on wherever you're listening to it, whether it's one of the Spotify, Apple's, another podcasting site, or maybe on YouTube. Be sure and rate that and review it. Leave a comment. Let people know that you enjoy listening. It really helps us. You can also visit pendulumcoaching.com. We have a weekly email newsletter that you can sign up for there. I just send it's a very short email newsletter each week, just giving you some thoughts on mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and leadership topics. You can also invite me, David McLaughlin. I'd love to come do a talk or a workshop for your organization. I do keynotes and workshops. I'm happy to come work for your organization and help you be a more mindful and emotionally intelligent organization. All right, let's get ready to do our meditation. As always, if you are driving, please be safe, be careful. Don't want you closing your eyes, getting too overly relaxed. So just be safe. If you are wherever you are, you can just get comfortable and relaxed. And we're just going to go into some thoughtful meditation here. If you're seated, you might want to place your feet on the ground. Maybe place your hands in your lap. Just relax. Maybe your back up against the chair, or you may be lying down, or maybe laying back in a recliner or something. That's fine. You might want to close your eyes. I always like to take a few breaths just to kind of settle down after all of the energy from the podcast. You can just inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. And inhale and exhale. And you can just continue to breathe normally. One of the things we talked about with Myq was evolving creatively. I'd like for you to think about how you have evolved in your life, in your career, in your work, in your thoughts, in your beliefs, all the different ways that you have evolved in your life. I had somebody tell me one time that they hadn't changed in 30 years. They were very proud of that. But we all need to evolve. Life changes, the world changes, circumstances change, and we need to evolve with life as we grow and mature and learn more. Just take a moment and reflect on how you have evolved in your life. One of the things Myq talked about when talking about evolving creatively is that in many things, you have to come to a point where you produce the output, whether it was an album or a book or a movie, or maybe at work, you have to finish a project. You have to, at some point, end it and put it out, even though you could endlessly tweak the details. There becomes a due date to many things. Think about how you may struggle or not with endlessly creatively working on things versus finishing them and getting them out. Where's the tension for you? Do you have to have a due date, or are you able to finish something and put it out? And how's the struggle of that creative process for you? Another one of the things Myq mentioned is that once things are out and finished, you may be able to go back and revisit those things sometimes and look at them in a new way, in a fresh way. Maybe even go back to some things that you have worked on and done many, many years ago. Maybe revisit with new eyes, look at things in a new perspective, maybe update them, bring them into current times. How are you at revisiting things you've already finished, completed, maybe analyzing them, looking at them creatively for ways that they can be refreshed and renewed, not just rehashing the same stuff over and over, but revitalizing them? Loved the idea that Myq talked about with the book that he referenced about visualizing, and the story he told about looking at paintings maybe for 15 seconds versus 3 minutes or even 30 minutes. That the more you look at something, the more you really see it. I think it's important when we are trying to think creatively that we give ourselves space and time to really think and investigate. How are you at allowing yourself? Many people think they're not creative when really they just haven't given themselves time to be creative. How are you at giving yourself time to really just look or think, look to see things as they are, to allow yourself that space to be creative? I would like to encourage you this week to look more. And as you look more, you will see more. Let's inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. One more time, inhale and exhale. And open your eyes. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure you enjoyed this episode of the Mindful Leader podcast with Myq Kaplan. Be sure and go out and enjoy all of his great material, MyqKaplan.com. And be sure to tell your friends about us here at the Mindful Leader podcast. And we will see you next time on the Mindful Leader.